Hello?
Hello?
Yes?
Who is this?
Well, who are you trying to reach?
What number is this?
What number are you trying to reach?
I don't know.
Well, I think you have the wrong number.
Do I?
It happens. Take it easy. Hello, everyone. My name is Lindsay Lunari, and today I'm going to be ranking all 5 Scream movies. Scream is my favorite horror franchise of all time, so I'm super excited to share my thoughts on these films. I will be mentioning spoilers, but hopefully it's not too big of a deal when it comes to films 1 through 4, since they have been out for such a long time. However, I will be sure to give a warning before mentioning any spoilers for the new film, Scream 2022. In my opinion, there's no bad Scream film, so don't really think of this ranking as worst to best, but more so as my least favorite to most favorite. So starting with my least favorite Scream film, let's talk about Scream 3. I like that in this film we take a look at what Sydney's life looks like after all of the trauma she endured in the first 2 films. She's living off the grid, she has a golden retriever, she's vigilant and equipped with a security system, and she works for a remote crisis hotline. So clearly she's become very reclusive, and I think it makes perfect sense in light of everything that's happened to her. I love that Gail, Dewey, Sydney all returned for this film and came out as survivors in the end. And the final shots of Scream 3 is probably one of my favorites out of the franchise because if you remember, they're all hanging out back at Sydney's house in the mountains, and as they are walking back inside, Sydney makes a very conscious decision not to lock the door behind her. And I think that's a very beautiful moment for her. I love that in Scream 3 we get to see Randy on videotape earlier in the film. He goes over the rules to surviving a trilogy, which is super important. And it's also very sad to see him on camera because of what happened to him in Scream 2. He was killed off. And I do enjoy these darker moments from the franchise. I think that Scream 3 is very entertaining, and I like that it was not so easy to predict who the killer was going to be. I don't necessarily like the reveal of the half brother Roman. To me, it felt a little bit like something from a soap opera. Um, but I do appreciate how well they kept it hidden from us. Sometimes I forget that Roman was actually responsible for the original killings. He initially reached out to Billy Loomis and showed him footage of his father having an affair with Sydney's mother, and then he persuaded him to kill her. Nobody really talks about that because Billy and Stu are so much more famous and notorious villains. A couple things do bother me about Scream 3, such as the character of Jennifer, played by Parker Posey. For some reason, when I watch it, I become very irritated by her character. And another thing that I don't necessarily like about Scream 3 is the setting being like the Los Angeles big city scene, and the studio backlots and stuff like that. I prefer smaller town settings for horror movies. Something about crimes happening in small towns is more interesting to me to watch as a viewer because the atmosphere is completely different. Next on my ranking is Scream 4. I love Scream 4. I remember when it came out in 2011, I could barely contain my excitement because it had been almost, well, about 10 years since Scream 3 was released. I went to see Scream 4 at a midnight showing, and there was a huge line of people waiting to see it. Not only is Scream 4 one of the most entertaining films in the franchise, I think it also has one of the best casts. I'm a big fan of Hayden Panettiere, Emma Roberts, Lucy Hale, and I was a big fan of Pretty Little Liars back in those earlier years. And it was very refreshing to see sort of like a new group of cast members who were closer in my age to the time of the film's release. I remember seeing some behind the scenes clips of Wes Craven working with the young cast, and I remember so badly wanting to be them. Another thing to point out is that Wes Craven, this was the last Scream film that he directed before his passing, so it's very special in that way. Hayden Panettiere's character, Kirby, is such a cinema buff, and I was totally obsessed with her. And I think out of all the Scream films, this is one of the most meta. You have the Cinema Club, you have the Stab movie marathons, and then like constant references to other horror movies. I also love Scream 4 for its storyline. Jill being Sydney's niece and feeling like she had grown up in her shadow. I thought that was very interesting. I also like Scream 4 for its comedy, even though I do prefer darker moments from the franchise because they tend to elicit more of my own fear. Um, but I do appreciate how funny Scream 4 is. There is one scene that bothers me though. There's a scene where Anthony Anderson's character is sitting in a cop car and he gets stabbed like right in the center of the forehead. But he doesn't die for another 30 seconds or so. And it's a little bizarre. He basically steps out of the car, starts like swinging at Ghostface, missing, of course, and then stumbles away. And then before he keels over, he mutters a joke about Bruce Willis, which it's funny and all, but I think it's something that you would see more like in a parody film like Scary Movie. But it's okay. I do wish Scream 4 was a little bit more scary, but a lot of horror movies don't scare me as much now that I'm an adult viewer. But as a kid, the earlier Screams terrified me, and I'll talk a little bit more about that coming up. Next is Scream 5, or Scream 2022. I saw the new Scream on opening weekend, and let me tell you, it's pretty fantastic, especially for being the fifth installment of the franchise. I didn't have any expectations really going into it, but I was pleasantly surprised at how much I loved it so much. Wes Craven was obviously not a part of it, but Radio Silence did such an amazing job with the direction of this film. The first thing I noticed was how much darker and more ominous it was compared to other Scream films. So I really love that. I genuinely felt sad for the character who was targeted in the first scene. And I actually don't remember feeling that way since Scream 2. There are so many callbacks in this new Scream to the original, and I think it's very satisfying to die-hard fans like myself. There are characters who are closely related to OG characters from Woodsboro, which is very interesting. We have the return of Sydney, Gale, and Dewey, and we get to go back to Stu Macher's house at one point. And this new Scream is centered on an entire new group of protagonists with their own backstories and complicated histories and relationships. So I think that was a very wise decision because if Sydney continued to be like the main target and the main link for every single Ghostface killing forever and ever, I think that it would probably get a little bit overdone and ridiculous. So I think her involvement in this film, as far as like how much she was connected to the story, was the perfect amount. Yeah, I love her so much. I hope she's always featured in some way. One thing I loved about this film was the acting was very impressive, especially Jenna Ortega's acting. She plays the character of Tara. Her performance is super believable, and yeah, her character really is put through the ringer. Now, onto some spoilers. So, if you don't want to hear any spoilers, I would suggest clicking the next timestamp below in the description, which will take you to the next film on this ranking list. Okay, so the only thing I disliked about the new Scream film was the reveal of the killers. Basically, I figured out who the killers were going to be before they were even revealed, and I was 100% correct. Amber, who is revealed to be one of the killers, the actor who plays her is named Mickey Madison, and she was actually Susan Atkins in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and she gave such a convincing performance as one of the Manson girls. Her performance in that film is like super maniacal and deranged, so I thought that once I saw her in the trailer for Scream 5, I knew in my bones that they probably cast her to play Ghostface because I knew she'd make such a good Ghostface, and she really did. And then, of course, it is revealed that Sam's boyfriend is one of the killers, which wasn't very surprising either because he was very suspicious throughout the film. There's a scene in the beginning where he pretends to not know anything about the Woodsboro killings, and I thought that was very weird. So basically, I was just a little bit disappointed that the killers were not a big shocker to me, and I also didn't quite enjoy like what their motive was. Um, their motive was basically to create like a real life reboot because they were such big fans of the Stab series and they were disappointed in the recent installments. And I sort of wish that their motive was something more deeper and maybe had like a bigger connection to just like the original like storyline or some more like connection to the characters in some way. But there was plenty of deep and grim moments out of this Scream, such as the death of Dewey, which was so heartbreaking. I don't think I've ever cried in a Scream movie, but this scene in Scream 2022 definitely had me in tears. But he did die a hero, and we can all be grateful for that. I really like the fact that we got to see Billy Loomis again, even though, I mean, it was his spirit, but that was very cool and unexpected. And I also wonder if maybe we'll get to see Stu again, perhaps in the next Scream film. That would be really cool. Number 2 on my list is Scream 2. Well, to be honest, Scream 2 is actually tied with Scream 1, at least in my opinion. I love it just as much as Scream, the original, and the reason for that is actually because I saw Scream 2 before I saw any other Scream films. A family member of mine actually showed me Scream 2 when I was very young, probably about 7 years old, and yeah, it wasn't until years later that I actually went back and watched Scream 1. So for many, many years, Scream 2 was was the epitome of horror for me and held all of my knowledge of like Ghostface and Sydney and just like the Scream franchise. It also like was where the seeds of my love for horror began to grow. As a child, Scream 2 terrified me. It terrified me so much that I like refused to go into movie theater bathrooms. I refused to stand next to white vans because of like what happens to Randy in the film. The opening scene where Maureen Evans and Phil Stevens get killed at the movie theater traumatized me. And I remember always being on high alert during Halloween back then because everybody would dress up as Ghostface. There were so many ghost faces like running around the neighborhood. And but looking back at it, it was such a fun era. The Scream movies are so iconic, and I was glad to have seen Scream 2 when I was a child because I think it made me stronger. It helped me to realize how to deal with like certain fears, showed me what was in store for the in the horror genre. So when I got older, I just started watching so many more horror movies. So even though it horrified me, I loved it, and I was so intrigued by Ghostface and Sydney's story. The fact that Sarah Michelle Gellar was in Scream 2 was super exciting. I still fangirl every time I see her in it. Her whole death scene is probably one of my favorites of all time. Another thing I like about Scream 2 is that Mickey and Mrs. Loomis made such amazing killers, and I liked that they had differing motives. So Mickey's was he wanted to make like a real life sequel and blame the movies at his trial. And then Mrs. Loomis was just wanted good old fashioned revenge. Another thing I love about Scream 2 is that there's not an overabundance of comedy. As I said, I do enjoy the more darker, serious elements of the franchise and the story. So, yeah, I like that there wasn't a lot of like goofy comedy in Scream 2, like there was in Scream 4 and Scream 3. It has like sort of an eerier feel, and I like that it's set on like this really beautiful college campus. I like that Sydney is majoring in drama and she's the star of a Greek play. I love that she has a normal, likable boyfriend and a fun loving best friend who's looking out for her. It just makes it that much harder to see them die because it's just sad and you feel bad for Sydney. Everyone around her is just being killed off, and um, yeah, it really like hits you in the heart. I also love how rewatchable Scream 2 is. I've definitely seen it more times than any of the other films in the franchise. Number 1, Scream the Original. Scream, which was released in 1996, completely changed the horror genre. Until Scream, we didn't have self-aware horror films that commented on the genre itself and its many cliches and tropes. Scream really embraces all of that, and its impression is so long lasting. I saw Scream when I was a teenager, I believe, and even though I knew who the killers were going to be since I had seen Scream 2 first, it didn't leave me any less astounded. The first scene in Scream is such a classic where Casey Becker is killed, and she's who I am dressed as today. The scene is so iconic because Drew Barrymore, who plays Casey, was such a big star at the time, so people didn't expect her to be killed off right away. And so when she was, that basically tells you, like, anyone, like, no one is safe. So it's a very iconic scene, and it's where we first get to see and be unnerved by Ghostface through his phone calls, through his cleverness, his mind games, and his overall menacing appearance. This is a villain who likes to taunt and manipulate and catch you by surprise. He's very quick and he's terrifying and he doesn't look human. The long descending jaw on the ghostly face covered by the black robe is very scary, and maybe not so much now since Scream has, been out for such a long time, and everyone knows who Ghostface is. But I think whoever created the original aesthetic of Ghostface was a genius. Scream was actually featured as number 13 on Bravo's 100 Scariest Movie Moments, which, if you haven't seen it before, I definitely recommend watching that. It used to air on TV. I believe it was like around Halloween time, and I'd watch it every time. Scream is so one of a kind, and it's where we first meet the characters we all know: Sydney, Gale, Dewey, Billy, Tatum, Randy, Stu. And I really love the cast they chose for this film. I think you should definitely check out Skeet Ulrich's audition for Billy, because he completely taps into his psychopathy, and he seems to make such a natural Billy. And then of course Stu makes such a played by Matthew Lillard, was such a fun and crazed accomplice. So I really love the casting. And of course we have Sydney, played by Neve Campbell, who's such a perfect protagonist. I love her backstory, and I love how resilient she is and strong. She was definitely one of my role models in adolescence. I think Scream is like a love letter to horror aficionados, and it's like a perfect slasher film. Thank God Wes Craven directed it, because I heard him say in an interview that he had initially passed on it. So yeah, I can't imagine the Scream series without Wes Craven attached to them. I love so many scenes from the original Scream, such as the scene at the fountain where they're all sitting around talking about Casey and Steve's deaths. And it's very interesting watching it back when you know that Stu and Billy are the killers, and to hear them talk about it is very, very weird. I love the video store scene for this same reason, and I also love Randy's knowledge of the horror genre. Like when the customer comes up to him and she's like, "What's that movie with E.T.'s mom?" And he's like, "The Howling, horror, straight ahead." And to me, that is so relatable, because I just know a lot of horror trivia too. And I love how many horror films are mentioned in the original Scream. I love when Randy is telling everyone at the party in the third act the rules to surviving a horror film while they're all sitting around watching John Carpenter's Halloween, which is like my other favorite horror franchise. So I was definitely fangirling during that whole scene. I love that like Gale and Dewey are investigating a lead outside while her cameraman like sits in his van going over the footage from the hidden camera. I love that Tatum is unknowingly being targeted by Ghostface in the garage, and you just think like, who's the killer? I love the reveal that the killers are Billy and Stu, and I also love that they decided to have two killers, because I think most people would expect there to only be one killer. Billy's motive is so shocking, and it's here that you finally understand why Sydney's mother's death was so often mentioned throughout the film, and it also explains why Sydney was the main target and why she is the final girl. Everything makes sense in the end. What are your thoughts on the Scream franchise? Do you have your own ranking? How old were you when you saw your first Scream film? Definitely let me know in the comments. And as always, I will be attaching a link to my Letterboxd account down in the description, and I will see you in the next video.
I only eat popcorn at the movies.
Well, I'm getting ready to watch a video.
Really? What?
Just some scary movie.
You like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
What's your favorite scary movie?
I don't know.
You have to have a favorite. What comes to mind?
Halloween. You know, the one with the guy in the white mask who walks around and stalks babysitters?